Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of this new podcast, Maverick Musings, hosted by me, Rick. This is a podcast about me talking about my experiences in life, as well as things I enjoy, maybe things I don't. And who knows, if this podcast starts engaging with people, I might even be able to branch out and have guests on to discuss things with, so you don't just hear my voice all the time. So, this is episode 1, and it's called But You Don't Look Ill. This is about how I live with my hidden disabilities, how it affects my family, and how others treat me. So, my hidden disabilities are I suffer from non-epileptic attack disorder, as well as fibromyalgia. Now, non-epileptic attack disorder is described as characteristic disturbances of normal function and control that superficially resemble epileptic attacks but are not caused by epileptic activity. So they are mainly linked to trauma, maybe particular thoughts, memories, emotions, or sensations. And with fibromyalgia, for those who don't know, is a condition that causes widespread pain and extreme tiredness. However, there is no cure for this, but it is treatable with painkillers and exercise. So I was first suffering with non-epileptic attack disorder when I was 24. So it was about 10 years ago. And it all started when I got my first full-time job. Life was going well. I was earning good money. And I was working at a well-known UK coffee chain. For legal reasons, I will not mention which one it is. And so I was on shift one day, was taking my break. Next thing I know, I'm surrounded by about 15 people in the smallest room you can imagine, whilst being under a desk. It turns out that I had collapsed and that I had an ambulance called for me within minutes of me coming round. I was whisked away in an ambulance, taken to the local hospital, who then discharged me after 2 hours without seeing me, telling me I'd just fainted. Cue another 6 visits to A&E in the next 6 days, and they were still telling me there was nothing wrong. It was quite alarming because I was losing consciousness and not understanding why. One time I came round and I couldn't stop stuttering for 2 days, which, as you can imagine, was quite scary, as it was every letter of every word that I was stuttering on. But that then disappeared after about 2 days. So after these 7 visits in 6 days in total, I was getting quite annoyed that it was getting nowhere. So my mum took me to another hospital up the road, and within half an hour of me just describing to them what was going on, I was admitted and I was put onto a ward and diagnosed as epileptic, which was quite a life-changing thing, as I didn't really know anything about epilepsy apart from what you see on the TV. So it was a lot of things to get my head around. And after an MRI, there was also a large cyst discovered in my brain, which caused a bit of panic. But they thought that wasn't the cause of what my seizures were. So after numerous tests, medications, my seizures were still happening quite frequently, and numerous MRIs couldn't figure it out. I even had 5-day video telemetries, which are you're in a bedroom for 5 days in a hospital with cameras or people sat in the room with you, observing you 24 hours a day to try and pick up a seizure so that they can watch, and also having my head wired up to numerous electrodes to try and measure the brain activity. After my last one of these, was just over 2 years ago, it was discovered that I wasn't actually epileptic but suffered from non-epileptic attack disorder, which is less dangerous but still quite debilitating. With fibromyalgia, I've been suffering with this since I was 14, and I officially got diagnosed during the COVID pandemic in, I think, 2021, which explained a lot of things because I had been in a lot of pain at that point for most of my life, and it kept getting dismissed by GPs and physios who essentially told me to just walk it off and stop wasting their time. So how do these things affect my life? Which is quite a big question. So I'll start with the easy one first. So with non-epileptic attack disorder, it affects my life quite greatly. It means I can't really plan anything because all it takes is one seizure and that's me wiped out for the day. I can't really be trusted with a lot of things, and I can't really do a lot with my children on my own. It's quite a panicky time for me if I decide to take one of them out. When I do have my seizures, I then have to go upstairs to bed, or sometimes be told to go upstairs to bed because I'm not in a state where I can basically function. My body is completely wiped out. I class it as a reset mode, so my body's going into factory reset. With fibromyalgia, it's a bit different. I suffer with pain constantly. I've been using a walking stick since I was 25. I'm now 33, so I've been using that for a long time. I struggle to hold things, I struggle to grip things. I can't sit in one position for too long because it makes me uncomfortable. And just any kind of movement, depending on the day, is quite excruciating, and it also affects my sleep as well. So I could go through days of just surviving on maybe half an hour to an hour's sleep, or what would be classed as proper sleep. And this also affects my family life as well. As mentioned before, I struggle to take the kids out on my own. It's quite a panicky thing because there's always in the back of my mind what would happen if I had a seizure while I was out with one of them on my own. And that's quite a scary thing because they are quite young. I have a 4-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son, and it's one of those where if I have a seizure outside with just the one of them, I don't know what would happen. I don't know how they would react, and I don't really want to put them through that, but I also don't want them to think that as a father I don't want to spend time with them, because that's far from the truth. I love my kids to death and I want to do all the dad things, but unfortunately my body doesn't like letting me do that most of the time. But when I'm at home with them, I try and keep things as fairly normal as I can. Although when I do have a seizure, they know what to do when they're at home, which is to go and get their mum if she's not in the room. Luckily, they don't really panic anymore. They just class it as daddy's fallen over again, which I suppose is a really nice way of looking at it. But it's also, I can imagine it's quite scary for them. It's scary for me because the first thing I do is I check that I haven't fallen on them or I haven't hurt them. because the last thing I'd want to do is to hurt anyone, but especially my kids, because they wouldn't understand why that happened. And it can be quite scary. And I know with my partner, she gets annoyed with them. She gets not the not the kids. She gets annoyed with my seizures because we we can't plan things too far in advance. We can't say, oh well, we'll go out to dinner here or we'll go there, because all it would take is a seizure in the morning, and that's me wiped out for the day. Sometimes when she's upstairs, I'd have a seizure downstairs, and she'd have to come down, sort the kids out, make sure they're okay, and then make sure I'm okay, and then send me off to bed. So it means she can't do things she wants to do most of the time, which, I'll be honest, makes me feel like shit, because I feel like I'm a burden because of my conditions. And I know it's not something I can control, but it's one of those where sometimes I feel that I'm stopping them from having the life that we should have. And it does get me down. It gets me down a lot. Something I don't often admit to them, but it, it's one of those where it's just become our life, which is quite sad. Although there are some funny moments in the sad times, such as me and my son arguing one time when I'd had a bad seizure, and because of the time it was quite late in the day. It was coming up to their tea time, and then it'd be their bedtime, and I'd had a seizure, and my son basically told me to go to bed, and I told him I couldn't because of the time it was, and there was a 5 minute argument with me and my son, basically him telling me just to go to bed and me telling him I can't. And it's quite odd arguing with a 3-year-old, because they are quite stubborn. And in the end, I just turned around to him and said, "Would it stop you arguing with me if I went to bed then?" And he went, "Yeah, go to bed." So I ended up going to bed, and it's those kind of things that they shouldn't have to do, especially at their age. But it's one of those things where I'm just glad it doesn't scare them anymore, or at least appear to not scare them anymore, because it really used to. It used to come round and they would be crying their eyes out, or they'd be clinging to their mum, and there's even the odd time where I have sort of unintentionally hit them while going to the floor, and it it broke my heart because I couldn't get them to understand why that happened, even though I didn't mean to do it and I had no control of it. It's trying to explain that to a small child who doesn't really understand. It just didn't really register, and all I could do was sit there and cry. But as well, it also affects my mental health as well, mainly because as I said before, I essentially go into a factory reset, but everything comes out. So even if I don't want to be moody or angry or shouty, it happens, and it's not great. Even though I don't intend it to happen, I have no control of it, and it's one of those where it's caused really bad arguments between me and my partner over, even sometimes, of how she reacts to my seizures, because she's that used to them now. She expects them all the time, and it's one of those where she says she gets annoyed at the seizures, not at me. But as I keep reminding her, they're part of me, so it's kind of a you're mad at me as well type of thing. But I do go through some good periods where I don't have a seizure for a couple of days, which is quite nice. It's means I can actually do things with my kids, fibromyalgia permitting. But it means I can see them grow up and do things and interact with them and try and do dad stuff, which sometimes I miss out on. And fibromyalgia, how that affects me is it hurts like fuck. And every muscle, every joint, every tendon, ligament in my body is just constantly in pain. I first started suffering with it when I used to be quite sporty. I used to play lacrosse. I was pretty good at it. And then in one game, I injured my knee to the point where I couldn't walk for a week. Not properly, anyway. And I ended up having to take a year out of playing because I took a month off to rest my knee, get it healed, then start training again. And then within 5 minutes of me playing my first game, I was off the pitch again, injured. Same knee, same problem, and I never went back to playing, which was quite gutting as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old lad who had finally found a sport he was good at. So I went to the doctors. They said, right, it just sounds like a muscle injury. We'll register you with physio and get you back to where you were. After 2 visits to physio, my third visit, he basically told me I was wasting his time because there was nothing wrong with me and that I was taking it easy and not doing any exercise whatsoever. To which I said, well, I walked half a mile to get here and I walk everywhere, so I don't think that's the case. Over the years, I had scans, ultrasounds. No, everyone said there was nothing wrong with my knees whatsoever. It was all in my head, is what I got told by one specialist. Until I finally went to the GP as like a last ditch attempt and said, look, this is what I'm suffering with. It's now hurting here, 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 and here. I know this isn't in my head. Please, can you get this looked at? And I got referred to a specialist in fibromyalgia. And a few members of my family suffer from it. So I kind of had an idea of what it was. And within 10 minutes of me being there, the specialist said, yeah, you definitely have fibromyalgia. You've hit all the points that we check for. This is the plan going forward. And the weird thing about fibromyalgia is the only medication they prescribe for it is antidepressants, which I thought was a bit strange. But the side effects of these particular antidepressants meant they were also a painkiller. So I gave them a go. They didn't really work for me, apart from making my mental health worse, ironically. So I'm now waiting again to try a different kind of physio. But with the waiting lists the way they are at the moment, I could be waiting a while. But we'll wait and see. It's one of those conditions where it has its good days, it has had its bad days, but at the minute it's very bad to the point where I used to only use my walking stick as and when I needed it, and then it became a semi-regular thing. Now it's a case of I can't go anywhere without it, and it's in a way demoralizing because it's it's my body basically telling me I'm giving up. My body's giving up on me slightly, but it's one of those where just got to look on the bright side, which I try to do, and hopefully now get some treatment and hopefully be able to manage it more than what it has been at the moment. So finally, I'll come on to how others treat me or how I perceive others to treat me. Mainly strangers. I I always get funny looks whenever I go anywhere. It's one of those things of being a fairly young man with a walking stick. Whenever I go to the doctors or I'm on a bus, I can always see the older members of the parish basically look me up and down to see what is wrong with me, and they can't figure it out. So they then decide to whisper among themselves or wait till I got out of earshot before saying that I do not need said walking stick. And it all goes down to the title of this podcast saying, "You don't look ill," which is something I used to get told all the time, especially with my seizures. People dismiss what they can't see. And it gets very frustrating because I might not look ill. Disability is not an illness, it's just something that affects you. But when you get told numerous times a day or numerous times a week that you don't look ill, it affects your mental health a bit because it makes you question whether you really are as bad as what you think. And you then start spiraling. I know when my seizures first started, I barely left the house. I only left the house when I really needed to, which was when I was in desperate need of food, and I would plot my walk to the local shop or the local supermarket. I would plot the quickest way to get there and the quickest way to get back because I didn't want to be outside, because I thought everyone was looking at me, everyone was judging me, and also because my seizures, I don't have a trigger for them. I don't get a warning. As I always say to everybody, I like to be surprised as everyone else. It gets quite scary, especially in the first few years, because I don't know when they're going to happen. So I lived in fear of it until I learned to just embrace it and be like, well, this is me. This is what I do. Let's just get on with it. If I sit at home and worry, I wouldn't even move for fear of something happening. But it's when, like I say, it's when people say, "Oh, you look fine," or "You're looking well," you don't look ill at all. It's like, well, yeah, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. And then when I explain to people what's wrong with me, they look at me as if to say, "Are you sure? Are you sure that's what's wrong with you?" But then on the flip side, there are those who are quite understanding, quite caring. I do have a few friends who, are always there, who actually give a shit. And it's one of those where I've had to give up working a few times mainly because of the seizures, um, because they then start to affect my work, and I don't I don't like being a charity case being kept on just because for the sake of, oh well, this is happening. If it affects my work and my ability to do my work, I know I can't stay there. And I remember in my last job, the first time they saw me have a seizure, it was I found it funny when I came around because of something that happened. But apparently, I was sat at my desk typing on the computer, and then the next minute I'm on the floor, and quite a lot of people panicking because they'd not seen it happen. They knew that I suffered from them, but they hadn't seen one. And I come round on the floor, and I just see this long blonde hair flowing over me, and in my dazed, dazed and confused state, I'm trying to figure out who this woman is that's over me, checking over me. I was like, I don't recognize the clothes, I don't recognize the hair. She knew who is she? Like, she's got lovely blonde hair, and it turned out it was my boss. And I only recognised that when he turned around and I saw his beard. But we had a good laugh about that. But I mean that place of work was they were cool with it. They were okay. They actually took care of me. They sent me home by taxi, which they paid for to make sure I got home. They told me to not come back until I was ready, and they checked in on me, and they were great. But I felt I had I had to leave because it wasn't right at the time because my seizures were getting more and more frequent. I couldn't afford the time off, and as much as they were really cool with me and they were okay with it, I didn't want to push it to the point where it became an issue. So I've been out of work for 10 months now and trying to get back into the job field, and I'm finding it very difficult. And it's one of those where I know in some instances why I'm not picked for jobs, although legally they can't tell me that's the reason because of my disabilities. It's one of those where I'll apply for a job or a recruiter will get in touch with me and they'll go, oh, just before we go further with applications, or you've been out of work for 10 months, can we ask why? And I tell them, I'm honest with them, and I never hear back from them once I tell them, or I get told within minutes that my application's been unsuccessful, which is really, really upsetting because I've got plenty of job experience, and but I kind of understand at the end of the day as well because I can't guarantee I'm going to be conscious for the whole shift. And would you take a chance on someone who might have a seizure? Who knows? But I keep trying and try and keep a positive frame of mind. But that's another reason why I started this podcast, because I need something to do, need something to keep myself occupied from going completely stir crazy. But also, I see this as a way of maybe therapy in a way, talking to you, the listener. Maybe my experiences or what I'm going through might help you, or might help me discover something that maybe I'm just not thinking about. While just talking, something will come out and it might make me think, maybe that's why, or maybe that could explain something. But I hope you know you've enjoyed listening to me ramble on for the time I have. Just giving you a brief introduction about me and about this podcast. Um, Hopefully, we'll learn something on the way, and maybe we'll have a bit of fun in future episodes. But if you enjoyed this, then please keep an eye out for the next episode. Hopefully, I'll get a bit better at talking, and maybe even get some better equipment, because I'm literally just talking into my laptop at the moment, which will probably be why the microphone doesn't sound particularly great. But hopefully in the next episode it'll be a bit lighter, a bit more levity, a few more jokes, who knows. But once again, this is Rick from the Maverick Musings podcast, and hope to have you back on the next episode.